Today on Locked On Red Wings, we bring back Tony Ferrari, and he's going to help us profile right-handed defensemen David Reinbacher and Axel Sandin Pellikka.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm a podcast producer for the Daily J, a WWJ News Radio podcast. Well, Scotty's the host over at Locked On Tigers. And today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. And when you enter promo code LockedOnNHL, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. And Scotty, today
did I lose my job with the news? Did you find that out before me?
What, did I skip that? Listen, I got a guest.
Like, did you find something out that I didn't know? Because that'd be real. I have a lot of work with the news this week. I feel like I would want to know.
This is your formal resignation,
right? Yeah, that's a wild way to get fired. That's kind of crazy.
So what actually happened is you've been overshadowed by a better writer in this episode. So I just left your credential off, bringing on Tony Ferrari of the Hockey News. Tony, thank you again. I know you're super busy with the draft coming up. You just put out your own mock draft order coming up here. We are really grateful that you taken the time to come on and join us and profile two more guys with us.
Yeah, happy to be here, guys. And as for the better writer part, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves.
Well, it's more about if I have any opportunity to take a shot at Scotty, then I'm going to take it. So
yeah, Brian already had forgot my job title, so he decided to kick me while I was down of his own doing.
Yeah, and if you keep it up, you won't be on Locked On Red Wings much longer either. So you better watch.
Oh yeah, for sure, dude.
Because I have that power.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tony, today we're gonna profile two of the top defensemen in this draft. We've talked a lot about forwards so far in this draft because Scotty and I are of the belief that the Red Wings' greatest need right now is goal scoring, and addressing that need is paramount. But they still severely lack defensemen who can play the right side. Really, if you look at their depth chart, they have Moritz Seider, and that's pretty much it. Everyone else that going down their roster is a left-handed D-man. You're going to have Ben Sherratt playing right. It's not as natural. He can. They need to address that as well. That's number 2 on our list, probably. So no better time than now to talk about Axel Sandin Pellikka and David Reinbacher, two right-handed defensemen who are slated to go in the first round here. I'm going to ask you, Tony. I'm going to let you pick who we go off on first here, which is the more interesting of the two guys in your opinion.
Well, we'll go in the order of my ranking, and right now I have Axel Sandin Pellikka ahead of him, ahead of David Reinbacher. I have Sandin Pellikka in the top 10, and David Reinbacher, as we'll discuss in a few minutes, is a little bit further down my board. But Sandin Pellikka, he's an undersized defenseman, but he plays really well defensively. He understands how to defend in transition. He's an excellent skater. Of course, he'd use a little bit more power in his stride and straight line, but overall, forward mobility is fantastic. I don't think you have anything to worry about that way, especially when he's defending in transition. It's going to need to beef up a little bit to defend the front of the net a little bit better, but he works really well along the boards. And this is a kid that doesn't panic defensively. And I think that's the biggest thing for him is he can deal with the forecheck extremely well. He's more than happy to chip the puck off the boards to his teammate or himself. And he does a really good job of kind of getting around economically, not worrying about forecheckers attacking him or really pressuring him too much. When I talked to him on the game tape video I did with him, we kind of went, I asked him, what do you do in a situation like this where you're getting closed in on by a bigger forechecker at the SHL level, a guy that's played pro for probably as long as you've been alive almost. And he just goes, well, I have to make the play. And if I don't, then it kind of ends up being a play, right? And he was just very blunt about it. He's not a guy that panics. He understands that the more time you give yourself, the more time you have. And I think that's the benefit of his game defensively. And offensively, he's a really good puck mover, really creative, a guy that in the offensive zone knows how to walk the blue line, will attack space if given to him. And he's not afraid to creep up into that slot. He's not a guy that fires from the corners. I don't think you're going to see him too often take a shot from the blue line off to the left or right side. He's always going to try to work to the middle of the ice before taking a shot. And he's going to try to work up ice before taking a shot. He doesn't take a ton of low danger shots. So when you get a defenseman that shoots as much as he is, it's good to see that he's taking at least medium danger shots with consistency.
Well, I mean, having a defenseman that isn't afraid to like pull trig like that is certainly not a bad thing, especially again, like not that he's going to be some incredible goal scorer, obviously, back there at the blue line, but for a team that is not only looking for goal scoring, but just like honestly shots on net, like that would be great. Like that's why Kubalik was such a great fit here, because it was like, oh, he's not scoring, but at least someone's not afraid to like let it fly and kind of shoot the puck. So do you think that, I mean, obviously we already talked about the right side thing, but do you think that like systemically, like there is a potential like legitimate fit in Detroit with him?
I do. I think you look at the defensemen that are in the system. Moritz Seider is your top guy, obviously, 100%. There's no doubt about it. But if you can get a guy like Sandin Pellikka who can slot it in on that second pair right D, he brings a little bit more of that offensive flair to the game that I think Detroit's missing a little bit on the back end. I think Seider brings it from time to time. I think a guy like Simon Edvinsson will be able to bring it from time to time as well. But I think both those guys are more defensive first, and then they work the offensive game. We've seen Moritz Seider dangle guys. We've seen him do some pretty fun stuff at the offensive blue line, but he's not that Quinn Hughes, Cale Makar dynamic presence, I guess you could say. And I think Sandin Pellikka brings a little bit of that. And at the end of the day, I think another area that the Red Wings have struggled over the last few years is the power play. I think Sandin Pellikka could help a lot in that regard. I think having a second defenseman capable of doing that and doing it at a high level brings another element to the Red Wings that they could work for. And I know a lot of people have been like, but the Red Wings are only drafting big defensemen. I think that's the theme of really the NHL right now. You look at Vegas's back end and they're all just behemoths back there. But this small, dynamic offensive player still has a place in the game. It wasn't so far ago last year when we were watching guys like Cale Makar, Sam Girard, and all those guys play big roles on that back end to win the cup for the Colorado Avalanche. So I think the small, undersized as a 5'11", 6-foot defenseman can be, it still has a role in the game today. And I think when you are able to kind of shelter him with that Moritz Seider, with that Simon Edvinsson, with the Wallander, like there's a lot of bigger guys on that back end. You can insert that smaller guy from time to time and give him the right spots, set him up for success, and not ask him to be that number one guy that are so often the top defenseman drafted by teams are. Is you draft a guy in the top 10, top 15, you're like, well, that's hopefully our top pair defenseman in the future. You don't have to worry about that in Detroit because you have a couple of guys that can do that.
Yeah, and what's really interesting too is, we keep saying that he's undersized as if, he's not Joe Hicketts. He's not 5'8". He's 5'11". He's an inch shorter than 6 foot. So he's slightly undersized. So I mean, well, yeah, Steve Yzerman has that trend of wanting to draft like Moritz Seider, who's 6'4", and then Edvinsson, who's 6'6". He likes to draft the big guys. I mean, if this is a guy who can bring an offensive touch to the game, and like you said, in an area where the Red Wings definitely need that. I mean, I think their most offensively gifted defenseman right now is probably Jake Wallman, but you're going to need to spread the wealth around. You're going to need depth scoring for sure. I have no qualms with taking a guy like Axel Sandin Pellikka. My question to you is, you have him on your draft rankings listed as 8. Red Wings are picking at 9. But other rankings around the NHL have him listed anywhere from like where you have him at 8 to like 25. Some rankings just have him not as high, and I don't know if that's a product of his size, the position that he's playing. But do you think that this is a guy that if the Red Wings want him, they should immediately get him at 9? Or do you think they can roll the dice a little bit and see if he is available there at 17?
I think it's going to be interesting because depending on who falls to them in terms of forwards, I think if you want Sandin Pellikka, you're probably going to need to take him at 9, unless there's a trade-up option from that 17th pick, which we can debate that another day, I guess. But I think if you want Sandin Pellikka, you're going to need to take him at 9 if he's there. I think you see some of the other boards. I was looking at some of the consolidated rankings on EP. Craig Button has him at 5. NHL Central Scouting has him at 7 among European skaters. At the end of the day, a lot of times teams reach for that defenseman in the first round or in the top 10. Who's going to be that defenseman this year? I think a lot of people think it's going to be David Reinbacher. There's other names out there like Mikhail Gulyev and stuff. I think Sandin Pellikka might be that guy because he's the one that brings that dynamic presence. And he's that offensive guy, but his defensive game isn't nothing to slouch at. I think that's the big thing with him is you look at a guy like Quinn Hughes, and I'm not saying he's going to be Quinn Hughes. I don't think he has that level of dynamism on offense. But you look at those guys, typically the 5'11" defensemen that have that offensive flair, and they are a black hole defensively, or they have a lot of issues defensively, and you worry about him. Sandin Pellikka really doesn't have that in the same way. Like I said, there's going to be strength that he needs to build up, but he understands how to play the game with his size, with his skating, understanding using his stick as the primary weapon on defense, and just kind of methodically guiding guys to the corner, stripping the puck off them and moving them off ice. Whether it's a quick pass to a teammate, whether it's chipping the puck around the board to himself or something like that, this guy knows how to do all that stuff. And I think that's the reason for me he's the number one defenseman on my board. And in my opinion, he's probably one of the only 2 defensemen maybe even worthy of drafting in the top 10.
Gotcha. Tony Ferrari of the Hockey News is joining us right now. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to finish up this conversation on Pellikka, and then we're going to move on to David Reinbacher. So stay tuned to segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. But first, I got to talk to you guys today about Birddogs. Guys, if you want shorts that are not only comfortable, but you can wear in pretty much literally any situation. They feel like gym shorts, but they look like khaki shorts. They feel comfortable and casual, but they look professional. You're going to want to get a pair of Birddogs. And Scotty, we were grateful enough to have had them send us a couple pairs to wear. And I got to say, man, I absolutely fell in love with them. They gave me a pair of their gym style shorts and one pair of their khaki style shorts. Both of them look like you can wear them wherever. And both of them feel lightweight and easy, and they're breezy. And they got built-in boxers, which I thought at first, I was like, that's kind of odd, but I'm not going to lie. I fell in love with that aspect of them because the all-in-one nature of them feels great. They're versatile. They fit. They're like almost an all-in-one fit. I can wear them at the gym. I was telling you how my grandfather put the boat in the water, and I was able to put those Birddogs on because they can serve as swim trunks too, because the material they're made out of, it dries so quickly. I was this close. I had to make a decision when I was getting dressed on Saturday. I was like, do I wear my Birddogs for my proposal? That was a thought that crossed through my mind because that's how good and nice they look. Yeah. They come across as shorts you can wear on a serious occasion. They're really good shorts, Scotty. What do you have to say about them, man?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they're my golf shorts. Like they literally are like my go-to golf shorts, but they like aren't just, oh, I'm home now, like get rid of them. They're so comfortable. They look good. They feel good. They fit great. Instantly my favorite pair of shorts that I own in my entire wardrobe.
Absolutely. Guys, not only are Birddogs great, if you go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL and enter promo code LockedOnNHL, you'll get a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. Promise you that. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are joined by Tony Ferrari of the Hockey News. And Scotty, do you have any other questions regarding Axel Sandin Pellikka?
Yeah, well, we talked about the disparity in like where a lot of like websites and publications have him going and whatnot. And you talked about where you have him on yours. Was that a like this entire winter you kind of felt that way about him, or was this like a late riser kind of, like we see so many times, as draft season gets closer, like somebody shoots up the boards kind of thing? I'm just wondering, like, with so much disparity still, with a difference of, borderline top 5 by some and all the way into the 20s by other, was that kind of like somebody who had late life for you, or is that somebody that you've kind of had your eye on for a while?
He's been a guy that's kind of been in my top 15 pretty much for the entirety of the year. I think he's been in the conversation as the best defenseman in the draft class for me the entire year. And I think that the reality of it is this year's defensive group isn't quite as good as years past, I think. And that's the one weakness of this draft. Yeah. And that's just it, right? Like we had a lot of good defensemen last year. This year, we don't have a lot of good defensemen. We have a ton of good forwards. We have decent defensemen. I got guys that can be second, third pair guys, but you don't really have that stud that's going to be able to come out and be the number one or even number 2 guy. I think Sandin Pellikka has a chance to be a number 2 guy. I think David Reinbacher, Dmitry Simashev, even Mikhail Gulyev, they have a chance to be a number 2 guy. I don't know if there's a number 1 in this draft class, though.
So my follow-up question to that, though, is like we've talked a lot about Axel Sandin Pellikka and, what's so great about him. Besides the fact that he's slightly undersized at 5'11", are there any like glaring flaws? Not that would sink his value, but maybe things that are obvious that he needs to do to become that bona fide NHL guy?
Well, I think the size is definitely the first obvious one. Anytime you see a 5'11" defenseman, you kind of shy away because that 5 is a little scary for some people. I think the other thing is that while he's very good offensively, I don't think he's elite. While he's very good at defending transition, I don't think he's elite. So you look at different things in this game, and I think there's a lot of very good, not elite. And I think that's the problem with his game. And at the end of the day, I think that's the problem with this draft class when it comes to defensemen, is there's a lot of guys that are very, very good, even great, but not elite. This draft class lacks that elite high-end defenseman. And that's just kind of where you're at with this class right now. So if you're going to go with the very good, why not go with the very good that has the highest upside?
Well, I don't know if you have any questions left, Brian, specifically on him, but I kind of want to have like a transition question, like as we get into Reinbacher and compare the two. Like there is such a debate, obviously, about who the best defenseman in this class is. You've obviously stated your opinion on here and in your writing and whatnot. Like, what are the biggest, I guess, differences between these two defensemen, and what are the biggest reasons why there is, I guess, such a debate, and where you stand on that side?
Well, I think the biggest thing with these two defensemen is that David Reinbacher is more of he's got some tools. We hope he projects. I think he played in the Swiss league, and that's a good league. Don't get me wrong. It's a very good league. A lot of his production came when he wasn't necessarily being forced to do a whole lot. I think he got a lot of assists from just bombing the puck from all over the place, and a rebound gets put in and stuff like that. And while that's good, what I talked about with Sandin Pellikka, where he kind of moves to the middle, takes a shot from a better area. Reinbacher has no problem firing the puck from just outside the blue line half the time, it seems. Like, this guy will take shots from anywhere. He's got a very good shot, which kind of makes sense because he is a bigger, stronger, more physically developed guy. But there's so much more refinement, I think, that needs to go in Reinbacher's game. I talked about Sandin Pellikka's defensive game, where he's able to use his stick. He understands the tools that he has, and he makes the most of them defensively. Reinbacher has all these tools, and I think he's still figuring them out defensively. I think he's still figuring them out offensively. He's a very good skater. He's overly aggressive physically, I think. There are times where he's chasing hits, and when he chases the hit, he lets a guy go by him and get into free space and then sets up a 2-on-1, or he'll go to pin a guy on the boards and just try to overpower him physically. And because he's still a younger guy playing against men, he's not able to do it effectively enough to limit the puck movement as well. And then he ends up getting a play down the ice that ends up going towards the net and getting a high danger chance, creating a 2-on-1. So I think while the physical tools are certainly there, I think he's a very good, strong defenseman. He needs to refine some things. He needs to kind of work on things. Whereas I think that's the area where Sandin Pellikka, despite being smaller, has that advantage. He understands what he has and he understands how to use it. Reinbacher's still very much figuring out how to use it.
Is this one of those situations where Reinbacher's ceiling is really high, but as it stands right now going into the draft, he's just a little bit more rough around the edges, so his floor is a little lower, and that's maybe why he's a little bit... because I mean, and this is another guy I was saying with Pellikka, but even more so with Reinbacher. This is a guy who's been mocked all over the place in draft rankings. I'm seeing one by Recruit Scouting that has him ranked at 35, but then he's ranked as high as 8 by Sportsnet. So people have him everywhere. You have him in the 20s. Like, is it just because he's so rough around the edges that this is why he's so hard to gauge?
I think part of it is that he's rough around the edges and the ceiling is still not all that high. I think you look at Reinbacher and you're like, if everything absolutely works out, you could get a number 2 defenseman, a guy that can play the physical defensive side of the puck, but his offensive game is still a little bit questionable because it's very simplistic. There's not much dynamism to it. It's a guy that I almost, and this might seem unfair, but I know Red Wings fans loved him. But when Mark Stahl was in Detroit, every once in a while he would do something where you're like, holy crap, that was Mark Stahl?
Yeah, yep.
Didn't know he had that in him.
We talked about that a lot.
Yeah, Reinbacher will do that from time to time. But so much of his game is much more built on that simplistic defensive game, being physical in trying to limit chances like that. So I think the upside is more of that a 3-4 defensive defenseman that can work on the penalty kill. I don't see much power play upside with him, to be completely honest, despite the fact that that's where most of his productions come in the Swiss league. I just don't see his skill level being high enough that it'll warrant power play time at the NHL level. When you have a guy like Moritz Seider and Simon Edvinsson, there's no reason to play David Reinbacher on the power play. When you have a guy like Seider and Edvinsson and you bring in Pellikka, Pellikka pushes those guys for power play time, and I think he earns power play time over those guys. So I think what you're getting with Reinbacher is a little bit more of the same on a lesser degree. And I think while that's very good, we all love more Sider, we all love Simon Edmondson. Do you need the C+ version of those guys when you can bring in a different element to the lineup? And I think that's the question. I know there's a lot of people that are like, oh, David Reinbacher is the next Moritz Seider. He's not. Like, that's just unfair to put on anybody. I think Moritz Seider was such an anomaly because he was Moritz Seider. He was a guy that came out a little bit out of nowhere, and everyone was upset with the pick on draft day. And even myself, who had him high up on my board, and I was very confident in his game, when he went 6, I was like, I thought I had him high. And I think that a lot of teams are going to go, is this the guy? And I think at the end of the day, for so long, everyone was chasing the next Braden Point. Now people see Moritz Seider and what he's done, and everyone goes, well, who's the next Moritz Seider? Who's the guy from the obscure country playing in an obscure league that we're able to kind of build off the tools? And it's unfair to claim anybody's going to be that, especially a guy like David Reinbacher.
We're joined by Tony Ferrari of the Hockey News. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we'll wrap up our conversation on David Reinbacher. But first, I got to talk to you guys today about FanDuel. There we go. Had to find it first. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That is $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. There's no better place to place a bet and with all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We're joined by Tony Ferrari of the Hockey News. And we're breaking down a prospect profile on David Reinbacher. We did Axel Sandin Pellikka earlier in the show, so go ahead and rewind. We should have some chapters listed on the description for you guys to go back and find that. Scotty, what do you got about David Reinbacher that you want to ask about?
Well, I kind of want to focus on the upside in his game. You know, we've been comparing and contrasting these two obviously a lot, and we talked about you know, on draft night what the type of player that he is going to look like. What do you think is the, maybe not ceiling for like his overall game, because I think you've been pretty clear about that, but what specific aspects of his game do you think he could down the road end up really excelling at? What's the biggest thing in his game that he can kind of hang his hat on in his career?
I think it's going to be the physicality. I think the fact that he's able to go in there, beat up guys. He's a strong kid. Like I said, at the end of the day, he's in there playing against men and usually doing a pretty decent job physically. I think he's a little bit over aggressive and he'll need to rein that in. But like I've said a million times, but various different skill sets, I'd rather rein a guy in than try to fire him up. Getting a guy fired up is a lot harder to do than trying to get a guy to take a step back and go, maybe don't do all of this. Do 3/4 of that. Play at 75%, because if you're trying to get a guy from 25 to 100, you're going to have issues. If you're trying to get a guy to go from 110 to 85, it's a little easier to do that. So I think that's an aspect of his game that's going to be really good. I think defensively, he is a big guy. He's got size. He's got reach. He's going to be able to play a good defensive game. It's more about, is he going to be able to refine things to become a top 4 defenseman, or is he a guy that's going to end up being relegated to that third pair? I think he's going to be able to get to that top 4 level. I just don't see him being at that top pair level. And I think that's where a lot of people are kind of projecting him at.
Do you think if the Red Wings go to, like, so it's pick 17, I won't even put pick 9 just based on where you have him ranked, but pick 17, and they have the option between another forward. Let's say they take a forward with pick 9 because Pellikka's off the board. They address scoring. Do you think that they should just go back to another forward to address scoring again, or not even scoring, like center depth, maybe even? Or do you think they maybe reach a little and get a Reinbacher? Do you think that's the play for the Detroit Red Wings? Because they do need that right-handed shot.
I think it's going to be interesting. I think it depends on what forward falls. If a guy like Oliver Moore is still there, no, take Oliver Moore. Like, don't be crazy. Take that guy. But if you're sitting there choosing between Andrew Cristal and a few other guys that have other glaring flaws of their own, maybe you go with Reinbacher. I could see the justification on that, especially because you do have the 2 first-round picks. Say you end up getting a Ryan Leonard with that 9th pick. Then you go with David Reinbacher, you bring in two physical beasts that are just going to want to beat the other team up on a regular basis. That can be really valuable for this team going forward. So I think certainly at 17, that's the kind of the range where I start to look at a guy like Reinbacher. I think you're able to get guys like him a little bit later in the draft that it kind of gives me hesitation on taking him too high, though. And I think that's kind of the reason I wouldn't go with him at, say, a 9th overall.
Absolutely.
Well, I kind of want to, we've had this conversation, like variations of this conversation before, but, like in this episode, we're talking strictly about defensemen. And I just want your 2 cents on the Wings taking a defenseman, period. I mean, like 17 is a little more kind of open-ended, I guess, but like 9 as well, 2 picks in the first round. Is that something that, I don't know, you don't draft for fit necessarily, but that is still a hole on this team, but they also need scoring so well, as we've reiterated a lot already. Like just in general, with the defensemen that are available in this draft, do you think that it's a pressing thing that the Wings should address early?
I think they should go 2 forwards. That's been my belief since they got the second first-round pick, especially with them both being top 20. I think you can get 2 really, really high-end forwards. And then if you want that physical defenseman, go with a Brady Cleveland in round 2. You've got 3 picks in round 2. You're going to be able to get 2 or 3 defensemen there if you really want a defenseman to fill that spot. There's going to be a bunch of guys that can kind of fall into that second round. Who knows? Maybe a guy like Tanner Melendick or a guy like Luca Cagnoni's there. And I think they're both left-handed, if I'm not mistaken. But there's going to be other guys. Lucas Dragicevic, maybe he falls to that second round, and you can get him with one of those picks from 41 to 43. There's going to be options at that pick. That's why, in my opinion, you go with one of the forwards. There's probably 15 forwards in this draft that have a possibility to be top line guys if they're put in the right situation. So I think, say you're able to grab a Ryan Leonard or Gabe Perreault, someone like that, Zach Benson at that first pick, and then you get the Andrew Cristall, or you get the you want to go safer. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of a Nate Danielson, but you take him. Colby Barlow falls to 17, you take him. There's a lot of options. Say you have Quentin Musty there. You bring in a Ryan Leonard and Quentin Musty. No one's going to mess with your forward group. It's going to be so fun to watch too. So I think there's a lot of options up front that Detroit should consider with both those 9 and 17 picks. For me, I go forwards. If you want to go defenseman, though, I think you got to swing on the upside, whether that's Sandin Pellikka, whether that's a Reinbacher, whether that's a Dmitry Simishev, a Mikhail Gulyev. I think those are the 4 that I kind of see as a fit maybe at that 17th pick. For at least 2 or 3 of them, I'd probably lean a forward, though.
So for what it's worth, Scotty and I are right on board with you. I think the Red Wings should target forwards. They've addressed defense time and time again in the draft, and they have a ton of defensive depth. We talk about how they're light on the right side, but on the left side, they still have Johansson and Wallander, who are about to make NHL debuts. Like, they're pushing for a roster spot. They have a ton of depth on defense. They should definitely go for forwards and scoring. We're with you on that. Now, hypothetically, if the Red Wings were to draft Oliver Moore and Gabriel Perreault, how would that make you feel?
It made me feel pretty good. I think Oliver Moore is arguably the best player on that NTDP team, but he didn't get the love he deserves because he was playing on a second line with a rotating cast and crew. I think that top line stuck together all year because they really were just the perfect mix together. I think the fact that you had the silky smooth playmaker with the skill and creativity of Will Smith, the bulldog who can finish and do a little bit of everything in transition and everything, and Ryan Leonard, and then just the intelligent play connector, the guy that can kind of push the right buttons for that line with Gabe Perreault. You had a great mix there. I think that's why that line stuck together so often. Oliver Moore is the guy that you ask, hey, we're going to put 2 guys with you. Can you make them good? And he's going to go, yeah. And he's able to do that. I think we love Dylan Larkin. That's what he's done for years with this Detroit Red Wings team. Oliver Moore is a bit of a carbon copy of Dylan Larkin. He plays a lot of the same style of game. I think he's a little bit more mature defensively at this age than Larkin was. I think he can develop a good shot like Larkin has over the last few years. The speed kills. And I think we watched Larkin learn to shift gears, use his speed effectively by not going 100% all the time, sitting at 85, pulling out that extra 15 when he needs it, pulling back 15 when he needs it, and kind of letting defensemen create separation just by the sheer fear of his speed alone. And I think Oliver Moore does that a lot as well. So I think you get Oliver Moore, you put a Gabe Perreault with him. I think Gabe Perreault maybe struggles to keep up skating wise, but his intelligence will allow him to be in the right spots, especially in the offensive zone, and connect those plays, push the right buttons, find the guy on the line that needs the puck at that moment, whether it's him or someone else. And I think it'd be a really fun mix. I think there's a few guys that I think could be a fun mix for Detroit at 9 and 17.
So in theory, if there was a mock draft and the Wings landed those two, you would go as far to say that they won the draft, maybe?
Okay.
Winning the draft is hard because unfortunately that dirtbag team in the Windy City gets Connor Bedard.
True that.
And that's kind of the automatic win of the draft.
Fair enough.
Anaheim gets Fantilli as well. But outside the top 4, yeah, I'd probably say that's probably the win of the draft.
All right,
I'll take it.
Cool.
How about
there may or may not, we're not saying anything, but yeah, maybe there was like a mock draft done or something that's coming out soon. So we'll see.
How about this? How about in the 7th to address defense, the Red Wings take a shot on a guy named Brian Fisher. What are your thoughts on that? He has an elite prospect
why not?
page. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Good guy, good character dude, freshly engaged. Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's you know what? Take the swing in the 7th round. What's the worst that could happen? He doesn't play.
Who cares?
He's drafted Keenan Draper.
True.
There you go.
Don't look at the fact that he's 27 and played only 3 games of junior hockey. Don't even look at that.
He's got an elite prospects page. That's all I look at.
He's got an elite. He doesn't even have a profile picture on there, but he's got an elite prospects page.
Retired. It just says.
It says retired, even though I never officially retired. They just retired me for me.
Send in the paperwork.
That's what I heard.
All right. Tony, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. Do you want to plug your socials, plug where they can read your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at the Tony Ferrari. Find me on Instagram if you really want to go there at THN Tony Ferrari. All my videos are on YouTube and the Hockey News website. I just did a video actually that released this weekend with Axel Sandin Pellikka where we broke down some game tape, talked about his growing up as a cross-country skier and a whole bunch of stuff. And he was the first one to swear on the show this year, so that was kind of fun.
Nice.
But no,
he's
a great in English. Yes, it wasn't a bad one. He said the SH word. It's whatever. I could still publish it, so it wasn't a big deal. But
I call Ryan short all the time. It's no big deal.
Short was the word I was talking about.
No big.
No. Find all my work at thehockeynews.com. Though I just released a ranking. They're also pinned to my Twitter page, so definitely check those out. It's a top 100 with a big blurbs on the top 50, so definitely check those out and reach out if you have any questions.
Gotcha. Tony, again, thank you so much. Scotty, do you have any final thoughts? We ball. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow, so stay tuned. Same time, same place. See your team every day.
Every day.